Do you want to build the best commanders from Lorwyn Eclipsed?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to know how to build them?
Mm-hmm.
Let's do it. Welcome back to Sadgic the Gathering. I'm your host. Do we think that Lorwyn Eclipsed can fill the hole in my heart? It just might. This set is what the community has needed, and so far, a massive win on pretty much every level. I couldn't be happier with it, you know? It feels like hugging Jim Henson on the Isle of Skye. And so I have picked the 5 best commanders from this set. And we are going to break down how to build them, including the central strategies of each and the key cards you'll want to include to do the thing it wants to do, win the games, and keep coming back for more. I feel like each of these commanders is a good mix of unique and fun and balanced, but competitive, and a little something special there. Each deck list for each commander will be linked in the description below and was made with love by a mentally unstable member of the Sadgic team. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. Let's start building. Starting off is Lorwyn's resident gods, Eirdu and Isilu. We're giving everything Convoke and flip it. We're giving everything Persist. Believe it or not, this is one of the trickiest strategies to balance and get right. Specifically because Convoke and Persist don't really gel out the gate immediately. If you're playing Convoke, the obvious angle is to run tokens. Get the biggest bang for your buck and get an army of 1/1s, right? But as soon as Persist comes on the battlefield, that sort of becomes pointless. So how do we balance the two? Timing is everything in this deck. Specifically, use Convoke as your fuel and use Persist as your endgame engine. Let's first set the stage with some ramp. We'll get a Dark Ritual out there, and let's make sure that we have some consistent, repeatable token sources, like Bitterbloom Bearer, Cosmogrand Zenith, Oketra's Monument, and finally, let's throw in some sack outlets and death triggers to really get things going, like Phyrexian Altar and Sephiroth. That's going to really double down the ramp and the draw engine for you. Effectively, we just want an abundance of options as we're building the board. Once the board is nice and full, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's bring out the heavy hitters, right? We're looking for high impact ETBs on big bodies. Stuff like Vile Mutilator, Ashen Rider, Moonshaker Cavalry. Because once they've done their initial jobs, we either want to sacrifice them or block with them so that we can bring them back and get them to do it all over again, getting the fun of Persist really humming. Additionally, with this deck, there are a few things we want to include here to potentially negate the effect of Persist with something like Undying. Because if we can, just rinse and repeat. I think this deck takes a little bit of patience and kind of a more strategic mind, but the payoff is really, really satisfying here. All right, for this next commander, let's just get mean. High Perfect Morcant will blight your opponent's creatures one by one as your elves enter the battlefield, and you can tap your elves to proliferate. Very straightforward, and it is very cruel, and that is very fun. You're going to be controlling the board very aggressively here, and honestly, it feels like an arch enemy type of deck, so take that with a grain of salt when making it. Elves are very abundant in Magic the Gathering, and because of that, you kind of have your pick of the litter when it comes to building this thing out. But really, we want to do 3 things consistently with this commander. We want to dump a lot of elves onto the battlefield. We want to be rewarded for the elven synergies that we've got going on, and we want to maximize our proliferate triggers. The commander will do the rest for us. So, what elves are we throwing in here? Well, to start, we want some ramps. So we want Elvish Mystic, Elvish Archdruid, and Circle of Dreams Druid. But we also want elf cards that can draw us cards. So, include stuff like Beast Whisperer, Champions of the Perfect, and Pact of the Serpent. And to really turn the gears on this thing and maximize our elf tokens, let's run Sylvan Offering, Elvish Promenade, and Brigid Brigid. All of that is going to stack your board and be lots of fuel for the fire for Morcant to dish out her justice. That engine's going to be humming pretty nice. Now we want to maximize those proliferate triggers we're going to get by tapping our elves. So let's use Dionysus, Generous Patron, and Flourishing Defenses. If we're going to tap and give counters, let's give a little bit of payment for doing so. You're going to have a lot of angry opponents at the table, so run a really good protection package here. And funny enough, with the high amount of ramp that we're running here, we're going to run pretty lean on lands. I think you'd be surprised at what you can get away with. Just apologize to your friends beforehand. Next up is everybody's favorite depressed elm tree, Doran. besieged by time. With the release of 2 really solid options for defender commanders in Abzan from Tarkir, I didn't really think there was anywhere else we needed to go with this strategy in this color combo. And I was wrong. This is where you go. Doran makes all your creatures 1 mana cheaper if their power is lower than their toughness, which is awesome. Plus, it gives all your creatures +X when attacking or blocking, where X is the difference between power and toughness on that creature. For the first ability, it just has to have a bigger butt, like Oron Frostfang, Genova, Shadrix. And the second ability is where things start to get really fun and kind of nasty. All we're looking at here is the difference between power and toughness. But who said anything about toughness needing to be bigger? Wrong! Yargalan Multani just became a 3018, and I don't even want to talk about what this thing becomes. Of course, we are going to run stuff with higher toughness and lower power, but it doesn't have to have defender to get the best bang for your buck from the commander. Bedrock Tortoise, Baldin, Sinister Gnarlbark are all going to do great here, and there are so many other things to include that give you life gain, mana, card draw. There's a lot to choose from. Plus, if you build that way, you're going to get some excellent synergies with stuff like Destined Confrontation, Expel the Interlopers, and Fell the Mighty. But I think the coolest thing about this commander is that your board isn't dead if your commander isn't on the battlefield. Obviously, that's how you have big, massive turns, but because you don't need to run it in a defender way, you can still attack and play the game and be effective if your commander gets bumped. Which is really my only complaint ever about defender commanders, is that the commander needs to be on board for things to function. This is a really fun strategy and insanely strong from the get-go. Doran gets my overwhelming seal of approval. You can't make a video about the new Lorwyn Eclipsed commanders without talking about Brigid. Here's the good news about this commander. You don't have to overthink the build on this. It's Gaia's Cradle. Go crazy. Go as wide as you want with whatever you want. We've already talked about some pretty decent white token creators, but you can go even crazier because now green is in the mix. However, in this instance with this deck list, when life gives you Kithkins, you go Kithkin. So here are some key things here to consider if you're gonna build Brigid in a Kithkin specific way. We wanna go Kithkin heavy, so we want some tribal payoffs. We wanna maximize our mana with some tokens, and we wanna stay pretty low to the ground so that we can dump our hands onto the board and save up for maybe some big X spells. You've got a pretty great mix of old Kithkins and new Kithkins, like Bristlebane Battler, Kithkin Mourncaller, Kinscare Sentry, and Order of Whiteclay. There's so many to choose from, and some are stronger than others, but really, as far as Kithkin goes, go crazy, get creative, kind of tell your own story with the type of Kithkin you want to include. And the nice thing about going tribal is you don't always have to include the most high value stuff. In a lot of cases, commons and uncommons are going to be really, really strong and successful in decks like this without having to break the bank. And the nice thing is that while our main creature base is going to be more Kithkin focused, our token stuff doesn't have to be. It just needs to be fuel for Brigid. So run stuff like Call the Copper Codes and Arachnogenesis and Martial Coup. Then bulk everything up with stuff like Caretaker's Talent and Intangible Virtue. And on the way out, get rewarded with stuff like Benny Brax and Adeline. No brainer there. And if we want to give ourselves a nice tribal boost, there's a ton of things to choose from, like Chronicle of Victory, Door of Destinies, and Coat of Arms. I feel like this deck has the most malleable approach of any commander on this list. There are so many ways to go wide, and I feel like this commander lets you do any of them. So dump in your token favorites, get rewarded for doing so, and use your 1 million mana well. And lastly, we've got my pick for what might be the most fun and unique commander on this list, Abigale, Eloquent First Year. Fun fact, this deck list was made to be pretty budget friendly. And while I'm sure there's some pretty beefy and expensive ways to build out Adeline, I just wanted to show that you can build it really effectively without having to break the bank. Abigale's ETB ability lets us strip down a creature of all of its abilities and in its stead put flying, lifelink, and first strike counters on it. So here's the plan. Fill your deck with beefy monsters that have downsides, because those are usually going to be pretty cheap creatures. But we're going to remove all those downsides and make those beefy creatures way more formidable way earlier in the game. And then we're going to blink the hell out of Abigale to make sure everyone on the board is getting that same treatment. I think some of the most fun creatures to do that to would be Blackbridge Troll, Calaxian, Phyrexian Soulgorger, Traxos. I'm shocked at how many of them work well in this deck. And since we're giving them all the same new keywords, we want to get rewarded for payoffs on those specific keywords. Stuff like Kiwende, Nykthos Paragon, and Vizkopa Guildmage. So if we've got some big guys on the board and some payoffs prepped, we've got to share the love and include a pretty aggressive blink strategy for Abigale. So we're running a ton of blink instants here so that by the time it gets back around to us, our whole board is set up and ready to go. Stuff like Charming Prince, Cloud Shift, Eerie Interlude, and even Meticulous Excavation. And hey, in a pinch, if you need to use Abigale as sort of a bad protection piece, you totally can. Just to target one of your opponent's really strong creatures and make it do something else. This deck is a little janky, and every game may not be super smooth, or might not even be successful, honestly, because you might get some downsided creatures that you can't quite do anything with, or you might get flooded with blink cards that you have nothing to blink. But it's a deck that's made for a special kind of player that wants to ride that line of might work, might not work, bring a lot of laughter and joy to people, and be able to stick the landing once in a while. You know you want to build Abigale. And those are your 5 commanders. What do you think? How would you build these commanders? Tell me what your auto includes would be if I didn't mention them. And what commanders from Lorwyn that I didn't mention are you psyched up about? And be sure to check out those deck lists in the description. Each of them is made with kind of a unique, different approach, and I think you'll be able to find one that you really connect with. Also, if you like the format of this video, please let me know and maybe we can do it on some future videos. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You're the best. As always, subscribe to Sadgic for more magic. See you next time.